This has been the whole disaster with the immigration lately. You've had politicians wanting one thing, and never mind that the public actually is demanding the other. Now, Australia had crazy levels of immigration in the decade or so before the virus crisis, bringing in up to nearly 250,000 people a year, filling the cities to bursting, testing our social cohesion. In the developed world, I don't think you find a greater growth rate anywhere else. Now, one good thing about the virus, probably the only thing, is that it stopped immigration for a while, gave us a breather. But now the New South Wales government and others are pushing to ramp it up again to bring in more workers to supposedly help the recovery and make us richer. But today, a big poll by the Australian Population Research Institute shows the public does not want at all to go back to mass immigration. This survey asked, when our borders open, what net immigration do you want? Just 19% said they wanted it back to what it was just before the pandemic, which is nearly 250,000 people a year, the population of Brisbane every 5 years. But 70% wanted much less, most of them very much less. 28% of Australians didn't want us to grow at all. Joining me is Leith van Onselen, co-founder of MacroBusiness, chief economist at the MB Fund and MB Super. Leith has studied immigration for years. Leith van Onselen, thanks for joining us again. The public hates mass immigration, yet politicians love it. Explain that.
Well, it's the great disconnect, Andrew, isn't it? I'm afraid that Australia's moving down the path of a kleptocracy, whereby the majority of Australians don't like this big immigration thing. We've had 15 years of it pre-COVID, where the net overseas migration averaged 220,000 people per year. And what do we get out of that? We got obviously record low wages growth. We got packed roads, people struggling to buy a house, being forced to live in tiny shoebox apartments, crowded hospitals, crowded schools, and of course, environmental degradation. And only 2 years ago, Sydney almost ran out of water. And yet we've got this crazy plan by Dom Perrottet and his cronies in the New South Wales government to effectively double the post-COVID immigration to around 400,000 people a year, adding an entire Canberra every single year with absolutely no plan of how to do it. I've got a question for Dom Perrottet. Where's the water going to come from? How are we going to house these people when Sydney already has chronic housing affordability problems, as does Melbourne? Of course, the pandemic exposed our hospitals as being totally deficient, yet we're going to add another 400,000 people a year on top of that. The whole plan doesn't make sense, and it's been. But this
is the thing, Leith. This is what I'm asking. You are so right, and we've discussed this for years. You are right. I don't get why the politicians love it. Is it because they then create a problem that they can solve? They say, stand in front of a desal plant and say, hey, listen, we saved you. Or they stand in front of a new hospital they're building. Listen, see, we are acting. We're doing good stuff. Is it that they're ribbon cutters? Is it that big business gets a kick out of this? Is it to balance budgets? What is driving a mass immigration that does us no good, and yet politicians love it?
Well, I think you got to follow the money, Andrew. Effectively, we've got this growth lobby of property developers, big business, the universities who all love big migration because it's a way for them to make easy profits. But of course, and effectively privatise the gains from mass immigration, whereas the costs are socialised on everyone else. And the interesting thing is, only 2 years ago, Dominic Perrottet wrote an impassioned article in The Australian describing mass immigration as lazy growth and saying that it crushes wages, and it's also led to housing affordability problems in Sydney, as well as chronic infrastructure problems. And yet here he is, obviously tapped on the shoulder by his big business cronies, and now looking to launch the biggest immigration program this nation has ever seen, bar none, effectively adding a Brisbane almost in 5 years and a Canberra every single year through immigration. It makes absolutely no sense. The people don't want it. 2 years ago, the Newspoll ran a poll of New South Wales residents, and 80% of people polled in New South Wales said they do not want New South Wales' population to grow anymore. So, there's a great opportunity here for Labor. If Labor had half a brain, if Chris Minns, the opposition leader in New South Wales, and Anthony Albanese federally had the slightest bit of common sense, they'd go the opposite way, because this is what the Australian people want. We're sick to death of it. And unfortunately, the politicians don't represent us. They're representing their big business mates.
Mate, I worked for Labor when it was trawling for the multicultural vote. It's got that pretty well stitched up. For them, it's votes. For the Liberals, it's an easy way to balance the books by getting a sugar hit in a Ponzi scheme of high immigration. And who cares? I mean, I wonder where it ends with a population of 100 million, 200 million. They never say how much will be too much. But anyway, listen, Leith and Onselen, you've been so right on this for so long. Please God that someone starts listening. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me on, Andrew.